Hi everyone, yes, that's it. I'm Diana from Open Robotics, work on ROS2 there. My colleague Mikhail as well, who you heard from before. We put this talk together to answer one of the questions that we get asked most frequently at ROSCon, which is how can I contribute to ROS2? So there are a lot of options. We like to think that there's something for everyone, but this is a short talk, so there are going to be a lot of links instead of details. So if you want to download the slides, this is the link to do that. But in general, I'm going to start with sort of an overview of the processes that we go through in ROS2 in general, and then start to call out different entry points for places that are good for contribution. So to start with, the general workflow for features in ROS2, particularly for large features like ROSBag or ROS Launch, we're going to start with a discussion, try to get some feedback from the community. As an example, the ROS2 work for navigation, there's a discourse post where we ask what worked well in ROS1, what can we maybe change for the better, and this input from the community helps to shape the direction of the project. So that then gets condensed into what we refer to as a design doc, and this tries to capture the decisions that have been made and sort of the rationale behind each of them, and also the high-level goal for a feature or whatever work is being done. So as an example, that nodes can have their namespace remapped or topics remapped from the command line. There's a design doc that was written first for that considers how it worked in ROS1, what needs to be different for ROS2, what syntax we might consider, and the different use cases that allows or maybe doesn't allow, what's in and what's out. And generally, that sort of high-level overview of how we want it to work, not necessarily the technical details of how exactly it's implemented. So once we're on the same page with that, we move to the code changes. And for something that is a large feature like this, we try to first step back and start with kind of an overview of what the different code changes are going to look like. So again, in the case of remapping, we have this sort of meta ticket on GitHub because the ROS2 code is hosted on GitHub, and then changes are made through what we refer to as pull requests. And sometimes these pull requests will be made sort of incrementally, and so it's good to outline the different stages that reviewers of code can expect. It's going to start with sort of minimal functionality, and then over time, once the groundwork is there, add more functionality at a time. And also, whoever is developing the feature, think that given the layered stack of ROS2, we think that maybe this functionality is going to live at the core, and the different data structures that are going to be used in the different client libraries. This is something that we want to get all on the same page on before the work actually starts. So then, of course, there are a number of pull requests that get in, and at some point, the feature reaches a stage where it's ready for release and packaging, which is sort of the process through which the code gets bundled into something that users can install without needing to know that there was ever code in the first place. There are status pages that sort of will show you the different packages that have been released, as well for ROS1, as you might be aware of in ROS. Okay, they exist in ROS2 like you might have been aware of in ROS1, but the point is that there exists a time in a feature's lifecycle where it has been implemented in the code, but not necessarily released and packaged out for users to install. But when that happens, there's usually an extra step which involves a bit of celebration. So recapping then the workflow for feature development. Again, this is just in general, and then we'll call out for contribution entry points in a minute. It'll usually go through this sequence of steps, but it's not necessarily a one and done process. There are a number of times where we iterate back and forth through these steps, and it can be that new information comes up maybe a year later that causes us to revisit one of the decisions that we made in a design doc. So then we go back and iterate through those. So usually there's another flow that's happening in parallel. That was the feature workflow that's more for developers, but also the users will usually be going through more of a troubleshooting workflow. And this starts, the entry point for that is usually ROS answers, where you can get a lot of your troubleshooting done, and occasionally that will spin off into an issue on GitHub that says there's this bug or there's some feature request that we as a community would like to see. So this is another workflow that happens. Again, I'm just laying groundwork here, and this is more of the user-facing one. So now we probably have enough that we can start considering the opportunities for contribution. So the user-facing opportunity, one of them, if you're getting familiar with ROS2 as a user, then you might be able to answer some questions that come up from other users of ROS2. So if you browse answers.ros.org with the ROS2 tag, if you can submit any answers, but also try to take a step back and think, like, why are people asking these questions? There might be somewhere in the documentation that you can help us to improve. It might even be something that sort of only users can see. Sometimes we're too close to these things to know how is best to improve this documentation. Also, as a user, you might come across something that's not working correctly or not as you expected, and so this then can lead to a bug report, but there are some steps that are important that you take in order to create a bug report that's sort of usable. So I'll call out to some links in a minute for each of these yellow bubbles. But in general, there's particular information that we need in order to get the right context about a bug report, and there's troubleshooting that you can go through in order to narrow the scope of where that bug might live. Looking back at this feature workflow, this is more getting into the area of less sort of user-facing ways to contribute and more of developer-facing ways to contribute. So contributing code is, of course, one of them. It can be that it is, if it's a large feature, then it's going to go through all of these steps. But we also have some tasks that we've carved out from larger features. Maybe all of the design has been done already, but there's one aspect of the implementation that is yet to be done. And we have a list of those sorts of tasks that then different developers, users, as you wish, can contribute as part of a bigger process. If you don't have time for contributing code, one of the things that experienced users from ROS1 can do to help ROS2 is to give input on these design discussions. A lot of different use cases in ROS1, it's important to hear from all of them, and even if you just go and say, I agree, that's very valuable feedback for us to hear. So this is the process that we recommend for ROS2 development, because it's a process that we've found is most likely to have everyone on the same page at the different steps, and so then you're likely to actually get the code in at the end. But for your own projects, it's totally up to you how many of these different pieces of the puzzle you want to incorporate into your project. If you have time as an organization to take on one of these features from 1 to 4, then that's something that as an organization people can contribute larger features. But also if you're just working on your own project sort of off on the side, then there's the opportunity for you to tackle it as you wish. We just ask that in the end you can contribute that back to the community, as we know that sort of the community is what behind ROS 1 and 2 is what makes the ecosystem so great. So, recapping then, you'll see that there are a number of different ways that you can contribute to ROS 2, and it's going to sort of depend on your profile, the resources that you have available, your experience. You don't have to be like a really experienced developer or have had open source experience before. We have particular tasks that have been carved out for, especially for new contributors. So we like to think that there's something for everyone. Take a look at these links, tap someone on the shoulder. Maybe there's someone next to you that has gone through this process before. And yeah, ask around, and if not, ask us. Thank you.
Let me ask you a question. Would you recommend for a newbie user or a student that really begins with ROS, which is the form you recommend to contribute?
So I think in this case, the main two ways we would see is, so we use a lot of labels on all our repository, and one of them is good first issue. And so if people actually look for like good first issue labels, most of them are like bite-sized contribution that don't necessarily require a lot of knowledge about how ROS to work. And then if it's like a programming language that people like know, they should be able to contribute it with like not too much work. Another way is you can pretty, like, even if you have very little experience, there are a lot of questions and answers, like ROS1 or ROS2, that like you would be surprised how much more than some other people you know, and there are always new people coming, and so answering questions is a very valuable thing.
Are there also any financial incentives to work on ROS2?
So the question is there any financial incentive to work on ROS2? At the moment, we don't have a bounty system or something similar. I think that's a decision above my pay grade. I don't know if there is a plan for it, but there are a lot of organizations that are like starting, and including like with the TSC, contributing people or contracting OSRF to allow to move faster on the ROS2 development. And there is a lot of interest in like ROS2 moving faster, so I wouldn't be surprised if there are some opportunities for contracting for some companies.
Hi. So these are all ways how to get in touch with the people who are doing things or how to find some topics. But can you just right now give some topics for tasks that you're actually looking for help with? I mean, launch, that was mentioned. I'm guessing actions.
So I think, yeah, there are several parts. So for example, actions, like launch and actions are a good example. Like action is something that has been discussed. We don't have like a design document like merged yet. So it's something that like is more like the first step of like this workflow. Launch, there is a design document and like several pieces, reference implementations that have been pushed, but there are still several parts missing. And for other things I mentioned earlier, like ROS time or other, like we are even further in the development process, but there are a lot of small pieces missing. And all of them have their own like GitHub issues. So it's really a matter of like how early in the development you want to be, but like all these topics could leverage some contribution, either opinions or code contribution.
So would the roadmap be a source of topics as well?
Yeah, so the roadmap is definitely a good source, and then we have, I think we have that in the links here. We have like a waffle board, a Kanban board we use to aggregate all the issues on all the ROS2 repositories, and we have labels in there on things that like we want to get in by the next release. And these are also like things that are like higher priorities than the rest of the issues to us. And so in general, like anything that has a crystal milestone on it or a bug label are things that like are very good, like we're looking for fixing soon and not necessarily in-house.
Okay, thanks.
So thank you very much.